In progress.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us. This is the weekly media briefing and public health update with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgili, Hispanic Public Information Officer, and joining us today are Dr. James Bridgers, who is the county's Director for the Department of Health and Human Services, as well as Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Assistant Chief of Public Health Services, and Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Mr. County Executive, the floor is yours, and you do have a hard stop at 10:45 this morning. Welcome, everyone.
Actually, I can go to 10:50, but who's counting? So, first of all, thanks everybody for being here today. I think everybody agreed that probably Montgomery County story of the week was the shooting inside Wootton High School on Monday, and it was horrible. And our thoughts are with the victims and the entire Wootton community for what they've had to endure. I want to thank the work of the Rockville Police Department, the Montgomery County Police Department, Montgomery County Public Schools, the Mayor of Rockville, our state's attorney's office. All are working together to apprehend the suspect, which they did quickly, and begin the criminal justice process. It does not relieve all the anxiety and tensions created by the situation, but it helps. I also want to acknowledge the support provided by Montgomery County Fire and Rescue and the county's Department of Transportation, and the county and city emergency management and staff from my office who are on the grounds throughout the day. Our Department of Health and Human Service leaders have worked with our school and community partners to help provide mental and emotional support to students and their families. I want to stress the importance of listening to trusted sources. It is far too easy now to be fed information that is not accurate. You cannot believe every cell message you get or everything that's posted on social media. These emergency situations are never exactly the same, and the information can change quickly. Our law enforcement and school leaders consider the safety of everyone trapped or scared and wanting to see their loved ones in the middle of this situation like this. They think everybody's sensitive to what it must be like to be in this situation. While I welcome a dialogue with MCPS and the council that looks at school safety, I want to caution anyone who thinks this is a straightforward problem with a simple solution. It is not. If it had a simple solution, we wouldn't have this problem. And this isn't just a problem in this nation, as our neighbors in Canada are going through one of the deadliest mass shootings in their history that occurred at a school in a small town in British Columbia. We're also living in a country that has far too easy access to firearms, including ghost guns. And the access to the regular firearms is bad enough, but the fact that guns can now be printed with non-metallic materials is greatly complicating. A ghost gun that doesn't have metal parts would not show up in a metal detector. It is increasingly challenging, given the advancing technology with weapons, to find ways of actually identifying weapons when they're present. I know the school system is testing out another technology that has some promise. It's been used in other non-school facilities that I know of, and they're doing a pilot in 3 schools, and we'll see what we find out from that pilot. We can talk with MCPS about how police can provide more help, but I think the superintendent's desire to combine personnel, technology, and policy together to bolster its security plan give us the best chance to improve public safety. I think I could stop there if you want to take questions about this.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. Members of the media, if you have any questions regarding this topic, and I see Bob Bernard from Fox 5 DC. Go ahead, Bob. Good morning.
Morning. Yeah, I've got a couple of questions, but I'll throw them one and then pause for anybody else who might have a question. I do, Mark, we talked about this just the other day. People do feel frustrated that there are systems out there that other places are using widely, like in Prince George's County, weapons detection systems. And yeah, I mean, this was a ghost gun, maybe wouldn't have shown up on the traditional systems as they are. Maybe with the new system that's being piloted at BCC and the others, it would. But what do you say to those parents who are frustrated that there are systems, they are costly, but we got to do something?
Well, there are systems. They are new. It's not like these systems have been around for a long time, and they are extraordinarily costly. If there was only one single point of entry going in and out of a building, it would be a lot easier, but there are multiple points in which people can enter, multiple doorways with which people can come into buildings and go out of buildings. And this makes it all the more challenging. The school system began this initiative not because of the shooting. They had started down this path before that. And I so give them credit for saying we're looking at other tools because we recognize the limitation of the tools we have now. And we'll see what they find in terms of its efficacy in the 3 schools. And we'll move on from there.
I do have a couple other questions. I don't know if Lorna, I should ask him now or let somebody else and then come back to him. But
no, if it's all on this topic, keep going.
Okay, yeah, it is. You know anything specifically about, we've heard, you were the first to mention to me about the ghost gun in this most recent case at Wooten, whether this student came to that school with an ankle bracelet because of a prior issue. There's been that talk. What do you know, Mark?
I don't know that. I don't know if Earl knows any information on that, but I do not know that to be a fact.
I don't know that to be a fact either. That would be a Rockville City Police Department. They're leading the investigation question.
Okay. Yeah. So we don't know that. Right? But Mark, thanks, Dr. Stoddard. Mark, what's your position on the whole change of school assignment policy? I mean, this student apparently did come from a different school where there were issues. We have heard from teachers anecdotally telling us that they kind of knew that this kid, the alleged shooter in this case, came to their school with baggage. There was concern, and yet something happened. Like moving people around young people who've had issues in one school, move them to another school. We can't tell anybody because it's private information, right. But good luck. Cross your fingers.
So I'm not going to put the blame on the school system for this. This is part of a problem with our entire juvenile justice system, not just in this county, but in this country. Our justice system is pretty much solely based on the idea you do something wrong and we're going to punish you. And for years, all any prison system or a juvenile justice system, for that matter, did was punish people. Now, punishment's not exactly an effective deterrent. Doesn't leave people with a good taste in their mouth, and maybe doesn't leave them at all equipped to deal with the social emotional problems they're having in the first place. You can't beat a kid into mental health. It probably works the opposite way. Right now, if a kid gets in trouble, we do not have the kind of juvenile facilities that we ought to have in this country. And I'm not going to blame it on the state. The state is not unique. There need to be facilities where you can put juveniles, and the facilities are meant for rehabilitation, getting them mental health support, and helping them get their act together, their lives together. Putting them in some kind of detention facility, which is just like there's some of the prisons I've seen. I was up in, I won't say this, but I think we have a great jail. I don't say that about much, but I was in Baltimore at the jail in Towson, and what I saw up there was pretty horrific. I felt like the jail was just a training ground for people. And I had a friend who was in there, and that's what he said about the jail. They just train people on how to be better criminals. We need to treat juvenile crime differently. We need to get them help. If they're not ready to enter in society, you can't have people who go out and hijack a car or carjack somebody multiple times or steal cars every night and have nothing happen. There've got to be a set of consequences, but the consequences have to be meaningful and be designed to have some impact on providing a kid the mental health supports they need. These aren't kids who are just perfectly fine and just go off and say, I'm impulsive and I think I'm going to grab a gun, because it's much deeper than that. So yes, I feel for people, and the policy of just moving people around just moves the problem around. We need something that's more serious and more substantive, and we've got to be able to do it in a way that people don't look at it and say, you're just going to punish kids and abuse them, and so we're not going to support this. You've got to demonstrate to people who are concerned about how the criminal justice system impacts young people. You've got to convince them you can put something in place that doesn't have the negative impacts and is actually supportive of their development rather than just punishment for what they did. That's a long explanation, but I feel pretty passionately about this.
Sure. And this is something we also talked about a couple of days ago, the whole school resource officer program, the CEO program that there is now. You have a former Montgomery County Police Chief, Marcus Jones, in charge of security for MCPS, and yet these things still happen. So just for the record on this occasion, where do you stand? I mean, should we be revisiting, should the council be revisiting the whole idea of school resource officers?
So I think, we changed the name. There's still police officers in the school. There was an officer in the school that day. But it's a cluster model. And so there was a call at Lakeland. And so the officer went over there. But the officer was there during the day. The point of an officer was supposed to be this person would have trusted relationships with the kids in the school. And if something was amiss, they thought the kids would come up to them. We know that somebody was threatened prior to the shooting, and more than an hour prior to the shooting, and probably at a point when the officer was still in the school. The person who was threatened with the gun by the same person didn't seek out the resource officer and confide in the officer and let them know that they had seen somebody with a gun in the school, and they actually had the gun pulled on them. Had that person done that, we would have been in a different situation. And I'm not blaming the officer, and I'm not blaming that person, but it goes to show, I think, is that this assumption that the kids are just going to spill their guts to a police officer because they're out walking around in the hall is not true. The officers are in the building. They're out for the beginning of school. They're out for the end of school. They're out during the lunch period. They're available to people. They have an office there. If a kid wants to talk to somebody, they can go into the administration office and go to the office where the police officer is. And I actually think that's better than a kid walking up to a police officer and having a serious discussion in the middle of a hallway. I don't picture kids doing that. I picture them wanting to, if they have something to tell an officer that's serious, I picture them wanting to do that in a setting that's more secluded and less public. That's just my view about this. So I think people are putting much more into the change in what we did than is actually there. All we basically said is you can no longer use the police to enforce discipline because you do not know how to enforce discipline as an administrator. That was the change we made. And the officers have no business turning what happens in a school that's not criminal into a criminal intervention because the principal can't deal with it or won't deal with it.
All right, thank you.
Can I add one piece of clarifying? I think it's really important here is neither the county council nor the county executive have the authority to just change the deployment of the police inside the MCPS system. That has to be a conversation in concert with the superintendent. State law mandates that the superintendents get the authority to decide what that posture looks like. And so, I'm not putting this on Dr. Taylor, but obviously this would have to be a conversation that involved Dr. Taylor and probably many more people before anything, so it's not even a unilateral decision that an executive or a council can make without the assent and agreement of the school system.
I just want to amplify that we actually had an agreement where that stated the officers could be in the schools, and what we found out, and nobody told us, that despite the agreement that the officers would be in the schools, some principals were not letting the officers in the schools. And when we found out about that, we went back and reiterated we had an agreement on what the policy was going to be, and we do expect the officers to be in the schools and available. And so when we did find out that the agreement wasn't being operationalized the way we had been told it would be, we raised the issue. But the change to let officers not be in the schools or not allow them in the schools did not come from this superintendent. That was a policy that happened before he came in. But I just want to add that because we've actually been proactive about this to make sure that what we agreed to meets the standards that we all said we wanted this to meet. If they're not in the schools, they're not available when we do want them to be available.
Any thought that this should be tweaked in light of what just happened?
But we'll have a conversation about this, no doubt. But unless we understand more about if anybody should have known or could have known that this person had a weapon earlier, I'm not quite sure what you're going to tweak. The odds of an officer being in the hallway at the moment that someone pulls a gun is probably not really good. And if there's an officer in the hallway, somebody's probably very unlikely to pull a gun at that moment. So it's tough. This is not an easy thing to go through. And I just don't want this oversimplified and people promising some fantasy. And then the next time something happens, it's like, well, now what did you do wrong? We just have too many damn guns out there, too easy to get, too easy to manufacture. And, you gotta find out, what did the parents know? Did the parents know the kid had a gun? Who do you hold accountable here?
Thank you, Mark. Thank you, Earl.
Thank you, Bob. I see a hand up from a number. I do not.
I'm sorry. It's Ted Oberg from News 4. For some reason, my Zoom wants to use a number. Just to continue pulling on the thread that Bob started. One of the things you said, sir, was with an officer in the hallway, it's not likely a gun would have been pulled. The fact was that officer was in a hallway in an elementary school at the time. Do we know why the officer was pulled away to the elementary school? And second, as you have this conversation to look at tweaks, should an officer be at high schools? Statistics show that's where the vast majority of shootings occur.
So the officers were in the officers are in the high school.
Not at the time of the shooting.
In this case, they weren't there at the time of the shooting because they're assigned to the high school and to, I think, an associated middle school. And there was something at the middle school that called the officer over there. But that happens more than once, and it's not like we have shootings every time an officer gets called over to someplace else. So I don't think I'd attribute anything to the fact that the officer went to the middle school. He could have been in that school. We still know that the student who was originally approached with a gun didn't go to the officer and raise the issue with the officer. And I'm sure the officer would not have left the school if he knew there was somebody with a gun. And nobody else went to any administrator and said, there's somebody here with a gun. So I'm not sure what would be different.
And to the question of, should officers have multiple assignments, or should your CEOs be assigned to a high school and then let another officer rotate between middle schools and elementary?
We can. That's something we can talk about.
I know we can talk about it. I'd like to know what your position is.
I want to talk to the police department and see what it means for resources. The good news is looks like we have a bigger recruit class than we've had in a while potentially. But what you have for resources and how you would actually operationalize this. But I don't think it's a panacea. If you think this is a panacea, I think you're wrong.
Okay. Thank you, Ted. Ms. Hackerby, good morning. With this today, go ahead.
Good morning. Mr. County Executive, I asked this same question or similar question of the council president at her media briefing the other day, so I wanted to also pose it to you. I'm curious about your thoughts on the communication part of this. Our education reporter was talking to some parents at that community meeting that Dr. Taylor held at the school, and she heard kind of a mix of things. A lot of the parents were complaining about just the fact that it was difficult for them to know at first where to go pick up their children. There were multiple messages that went out saying that it would be at one place, it would be at another place. And in addition to that, there was sort of a delay in getting an official statement out there after that, initial string of posts on social media from the police department. It wasn't actually until after, I think, 8 o'clock that we learned that there was still a gun unaccounted for. I'm just kind of curious about your thoughts on what was shared with the public and when, and if that went the way that you think it should have.
So nobody's given me a timeline for everything that got shared, but I do know that that parents were concerned and feeling like they got conflicting messages. I think the issue is more the uniformity of the message, how fast it goes out, and how clear it is, and how accurate it is. And I think those are the things, the school system, those are all fixable. And those are things I think they're going to look at and make sure that they've got a sequence and a plan that gets the messages out the way they're supposed to get out. The other stuff I don't know about, I haven't heard about. So, it all sounds like a comms issue. I'm not sure you would have said that the gun wasn't found yet. I think you didn't want anybody to know what they'd found or not found. You wanted the police to be free to do their search. And as one of the reasons why people were held in a school is they didn't want anybody going home because that student apparently had had contact with other students, and they were leery of the possibility of possibly having handed off the gun to somebody else who might have been, moved to another place to be dismissed from. They wanted to get as much information as they could possibly get before they started dismissing the kids, lest they dismiss somebody who was potentially carrying the gun. This is very complicated. It is not a straightforward, simple thing.
I can give some additional context because obviously I was at the school on Monday, and pretty much from about 3:00 on through the end of at the press conference. And to give you some context of what was going on with the police officers at the time, and it was from my perspective, sort of watching this as an observer on scene. I think it's important to understand what they were actually doing in real time is figuring out via video where the student who had the firearm went after the shooting, who that individual interacted with, where did those individuals go, because all of those places could have been places where the gun had been deposited. And if they were going to evacuate the school, when they were going to evacuate the school, they needed to know what the safest route for the students to take from each classroom outside the building that would not have them going into a place that either was a crime scene or where the firearm could have potentially been. And so obviously if the individual with the firearm interacted with 2 or 3 different people, the police had to follow a video of where those 2 or 3 people went after the interaction with the person who was the shooter. And so obviously when you do that, you're doing that in real time and figuring out where the safest route to bring students out is. Furthermore, as I think is well known at this point, the shooter was not arrested inside the school. And so that individual, the police had to make some determinations about where outside the school that individual might have gone, because there were concerns about, could the gun be in the parking lot? Could it be in the student parking lot? Could it be in the staff parking lot? And obviously all those things needed to be investigated in real time. Now, I think in terms of the communication, I'm a parent. I have a high schooler in an MCPS system. I have a middle schooler as well. And certainly I could appreciate parents feeling like they need to get communication faster. The tricky thing is being able to say things that parents want to hear, which is, are your students safe, number one, and is the situation abated? And I think that was largely what we were trying to determine at the time with the police at the time that it was going on. Now, with regard to the communication about where the reunification site was going to be, as anyone who was there probably watched, the ingress and egress from that site was very complicated because you had dozens of police officers rushing to that scene to protect students, and several fire trucks and fire engines and a very large response. It creates a bottleneck on the parkway there that impacted both Frost Middle School and the high school. And so obviously when you do that, that creates challenges with utilizing Frost Middle School for your reunification site. So initially that was announced. Then we realized, well, people are going to be trying to come down here and not going to be able to access that site. And then the police sort of rescinded that temporarily until they could clear out more of the traffic and be able to get people to Frost Middle School. And so that's sort of the I guess behind the scenes of what actually was occurring, to give you some context for why some decisions were made and announced. This is one of those things where the best laid plans get met with what actually happens on the ground. And, while we do exercises around school safety and school response, we don't do them routinely at every school in every situation. And where would the responders be coming from, and how would they park, and what would be the impacts? And so these are very difficult things to replicate via exercises or practice events. And so when they actually happen, you end up adapting the model that you've been working off of based on what actually happens on the ground. And I think that's exactly what happened in this case.
Can I just ask a quick follow-up for Dr. Stoddard? I want to just quickly, I'm having trouble reconciling how the police were able to confidently say that the scene was secure, that the students were safe when they still hadn't found a gun and they sent everybody home before they had found a gun. I'm
There were a
struggling with that.
number of gun sniffing dogs that were on scene that day, and they ran them repeatedly through the hallways that they were going to take students through. And so, and furthermore, when students were evacuated from the school, essentially what was made was a cordon where there were officers on either side, and they were walked by classroom down. And so because of the way they did the evacuation and the route that they took, and they planned that out, which, frankly, I had not seen this be done before. I'm not a law enforcement officer. I've never been trained in it. I've interacted with them a number of times, but not in a situation quite like this along this time frame. I thought they did a really exceptional job between Montgomery County Police Department and Rockville City Police Department of coordinating the safe egress of students out, getting them on buses, and getting them down to Frost Middle School. And once that process did start, which took, I think it was probably about 4:30 before they started that process, took about an hour and 15 or so minutes, hour and 20 minutes or so to get all the students out of the school. But they had done a screening enough where they had enough confidence that it wasn't going to be along the route, and they had enough video to suggest it wasn't going to be along the route, that they could get people out. And so, there were several instances where throughout the afternoon there were reports that was the suspect shooter in a classroom, and they went and had to actually clear that classroom with law enforcement officers, and that individual was not in the classroom. And so that was all happening during that intervening, about 90 minutes between when the officers really arrived and when the evacuation of the students really took place.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kate Ryan, WTOP. Good morning, Kate.
Good morning. Thank you so much. And I apologize if I'm asking something that was already asked and answered, but I did want to touch on a couple of things and some things that Mr. Stoddard, you just brought up. In terms of the process, is there anything here that we learned in the 4 intervening years since Magruder and this incident? Because they are very, very similar in terms of where the shooting happened inside the school, in terms of the long period of time it took to get families reunited, and the difficulty. I mean, as you say, that particular site was a challenge. I remember Magruder, traffic stacked back for what seemed like miles that evening. I was there and covered that one. Is there anything that has been learned that was applied here, or do we need to go back and learn more from both of these? Then I have 2 follow-ups.
First off, let me say, as a precursor, there will always be things to learn. I've never had an incident that I've responded to, whether it's a school-based event. I've been responding to emergencies in Montgomery County for the better part of the last about 17 years, and there's never been an event where we didn't have lessons to learn. In being present at Magruder and now present at Wootton, I think actually, from my perspective, the decision-making that happened at Wootton was substantially better and more efficient from a law enforcement coordination and coordination between the Rockville City Police Department and the Montgomery County Police Department. The coordination of getting resources and things on site was far, far better in this situation than I recall it being. I remember we made decisions earlier at Magruder to have, people coming into that building before we had a great understanding of what had happened. And, this time people were held back from going into the building until law enforcement had done more of their work investigatively and to secure the scene. Communications, I think, I talked extensively to Dr. Taylor on Monday. He was obviously present from about maybe 3:30, 4 o'clock on through the end of the evening. And I would say, the lesson that I think learned, first off, the reunification process at Frost Middle School, MCPS needed to keep adding staff. And I think that one of the lessons that they learned is just how staff intensive it was to do both a middle school and a high school at the same site, which is sort of unique compared to Magruder. You had students, you had the middle school students who needed to be reunited, and you had the high schoolers who needed to be bused down from the high school to the middle school and then reunited from there. And so I think from a staffing perspective, that's going to be a lesson learned that will be improved. From the actual process itself, it was cleaner, meaning that there was less. I remember from Magruder, not kids were getting lost, but it was more. It didn't proceed as fast in terms of, you know, the person by person connections. The MCPS has done a lot of work in the intervening years around their documentation. They had bins that were ready for reunification that they had trained on since Magruder, and so the staff on scene at Wooten, I thought, did a very good job with just the process of reunification. It just the volume of it became an issue for the number of staff that they have, and so. In terms of communication, I think in thinking about this and in thinking about what happened on Monday, I think one of my thoughts is perhaps we could have done a law enforcement based press conference earlier to say more about it from a law enforcement perspective. But I absolutely understood, and frankly, I agreed with Dr. Taylor's point that he felt uncomfortable going before the media while he still had children who had not been reunited with their parents. And I think that was a lesson they learned from Magruder, and I think, frankly, was an important lesson to have been learned. And so I agreed with that decision. I just think we could have gone without MCPS in a press conference earlier and done a second press conference where MCPS talked about their part of this that would allow them to keep doing the work that they were doing at the time, and then allow law enforcement to get ahead on what they could announce in terms of the investigation. But, you know, like I said, there's things we can learn every time, and that was probably one where we could have broken it up a little bit differently and explained why we were doing that pretty clearly.
Gotcha. I want to be conscious of your time, but 2 quick questions. SROs, what are your thoughts on bringing them back? Again, we talked to NASRO yesterday, the National Association of School Resource Officers, who obviously have a point of view on that. But we also talked to the founder and CEO, co-founder and CEO of the security system that's going to be tried out at 3 of the schools. So first, I want to know about SROs, but I'll put the second question to you as well. You mentioned a review of video. Is that the school cameras video that you were looking at? And how do you think the Volt AI folks say, hey, what our system would do is put a human being on that camera at all times to alert you to precisely where things are, so you don't have that video review process? Thoughts on that?
Well, I think, sure. Mark, do you want to? I mean,
No, go ahead.
I mean, I don't want to take away your press conference time. I think on the SRO issue, I think that, as the county executive said, like we can continue to have conversations, and there's always opportunities to do better. But I think, and this is something the county executive alluded to, I think that there's a fundamental misunderstanding of the way that the CEOs currently work, and the perception is that they're not in the schools. Now, the one thing I will also point out, I think that the question of whether they could be in the high schools at all times and we don't do as much or with the middle schools is a conversation to have. But I think it's important to understand that one of the lessons that we've learned is that if you look at, for example, predictors of absenteeism in high schools, you see them borne out in middle schools. That is to say, the students who are going to graduate from those middle schoolers will be the high schoolers. So I think it's important that we have officers who are developing relationships with students and having a difference in those students' lives at an earlier point as well, rather than just waiting for them to get to high school and not having had those relationships developed. And so that is an important conversation or context for why the decision was made to have a cluster-based model. Many of the issues that you see in the high schools start as conflicts between individuals in the middle schools or have their origins there. And so when we talk about preventing these things from happening in the future, I think it's important to remember that the schools are a continuum, and we need to appreciate that many of the issues that we see in high schools have their genesis in middle schools. Now to the technology piece. I think there's a lot of great technology that's being developed, and frankly, it's moving super fast. Like, I know that I think the School Safety Office for Maryland funded a grant in Charles County with an AI-based weapons detection system. And my understanding is Charles County did not have great success with that program, but that was back in 2023. We're now in 2026. The technology is moving, AI-based technology is moving at an incredibly rapid rate, which is why you need to keep evaluating it and figuring out, is this technology going to work for MCPS in our system, in our context? Which is why I think the school system is right to do a pilot before you make a massive investment. I do not know Volt AI well enough to tell you the difference, but I will tell you that companies will promise a lot and not always do their systems work in the context of the environment in which you test them, which is why I think, and MCPS would be wise to do this, not just pick one vendor and go with one vendor without looking at what is out there available today, what is on the horizon, and combining those things. School safety is a combination of personnel, policy, and technology. That is always going to be the case and will continue to be the case regardless of what technology is developed in the future. And I think that there's got to be synergy there.
Gotcha. Last question, if I can. What is the current model on CEOs? I understand they're cluster based. So do they have one high school and how many middles? And I know state law requires that elementaries have, quote, coverage, which can mean just swinging by.
Right.
Can you give us an example of, Officer Joe is stationed where and how many schools does that officer serve?
It's based on proximity. So it's usually 2 to 3 middle schools that they'll be servicing. And they spend the majority of, I say majority, probably 2/3 of their time or more in the high schools. And they will go out periodically, maybe on Wednesday, I'll go out to this middle school, or on Tuesday, I'll go out to this middle school. And it'll be based on what's going on there. Now, if there's an issue at a middle school, they will go out and deal with said issue. If there's a potential, we've frankly had some pretty serious fights and things like that in the middle schools where there is a question of whether there's a potential role for the CEO in those settings. But that will happen periodically. But for the most part, I would, certainly the expectation is morning arrival, lunchtime, and dismissal, that the CEO will be at the high school for all of those things. And then they will utilize the time in the office between, depending on whether they need to go out and visit their middle schools or not. So, like I said, probably 2/3 of the time they're spending in the high schools, maybe more, maybe less, depending on the week and the individual and what's going on in the middle schools. But that's sort of a rough average, I would say, across the system.
I really appreciate your answers. Thanks for the time.
Hey, Lorna, can I ask one last quick question? I know you got to go here shortly.
Bob, hold on just a second, because
Yes,
we have about 6 minutes for the county executive to depart, and Mariam Shahzad has been waiting for Montgomery Community Media. Mariam, go ahead.
Thank you. Just on the SROs, yesterday the comment was made by the county state's attorney, that the 2 school shootings that have happened here have happened after the SRO model changed, right? Because Magruder is characterized as the first school shooting in MCPS. So I guess, what I'm hearing, Mr. Elrich, is that you don't really agree with that kind of correlation.
Absolutely not. I mean, correlation is not causation. And there's no evidence that the change in policy, if we did not remove SROs from schools. They are not present. They are there, and they're in the high school most of the time. Our biggest problem is the growing prevalence of guns and the growing availability of ghost guns, and the failure in general, to prevent people who have no business getting a gun, getting a hold of a gun. This is the root of the problem, whether it's a Canadian problem or American problem. You get too many weapons too readily available and in the hands of children who, frankly, do not have the mental capacity at that age to make the judgments they need to make. And they do, impulsive, dangerous things. And I think this is an example. And like I said before, you don't have a criminal justice system that provides support or help to these kids. It's just repeated catch, release, tell the kid not to do this again, and then catch, release, and repeat, with no help coming to most of these kids until something terrible happens. So, if we want to deal with this, we need to start dealing with the kids who show this. And I'll say, I taught elementary school, everything that everybody tells you you see in middle school that's a precursor to high school. You saw a lot of this in elementary school. You see the breakdown in discipline, the breakdown in lack of respect for other kids, and how kids act out on that. Those kids, unsurprisingly, wind up often in trouble when they get to middle school and going up. We have multiple opportunities to intervene. We don't intervene enough, and the school system is not a mental health facility, which is my short way of saying we need additional resources, and we can't expect teachers in the schools to deal with kids who are having mental health issues. It is not, schools are not equipped for that.
Okay, I see Bob and Kate both have hands up. Apparently they have follow-up questions. If you guys can make it real quick, Bob, go first. Go ahead.
Thanks, Lorna. Yeah, and this is for Dr. Bridgers, following up on just what Mark was saying there. This whole notion of the musical chair effect of the school system, where like some administrators or teachers will know, oh, this is a new kid. I've heard he had problems somewhere else, and I say he, could be she. And now we're dealing with this, and nobody really knows what we're dealing with. But any other way to intervene in that so those situations, as apparently happened at Wooten this week, don't happen again?
So thank you for that question. First and foremost, as I've said on all of the county executives' press call, is we have a mobile crisis help team. We have mobile crisis interventions. Folks should reach out to 240-777-4000. We also have our behavioral health and crisis service teams who work collaboratively with our Montgomery County Public School partners, and we assess all the situations and challenges. And as Dr. Stoddard said and the county executive said, there is no one right answer or one right fit. Communication is the key, and we are in constant communication with some of those challenges. And if they've reached out to us for some of those services, we continue to monitor those services and make recommendations and referrals.
Thank you.
Thank you. I kept saying Bob, but it was Ted. I think we're done with the questions regarding this topic. Mr. County Executive, you have just a couple minutes left. Do you want to cover the rest of the topics?
I just want to touch on a couple of things. I'll do this very quickly. First, I just want to acknowledge that two very important leaders in our African American community died this week, and it was where is this in my? One is Mary Wells Hartley, who worked for a long time in Prince George's County, but became the first Black woman to serve on Montgomery County's planning board. And, she was very involved in the community, and, people remember her very fondly, and particularly for her work on recreation programming and her belief that, the recreation work that was done in park and planning and recreation departments in general, they were unified when they functioned in Prince George's County. They play a really important role in kids. And the other person who died was Reverend Ruby Reese Moon. And, her life reads like a chapter in the Civil Rights Movement. She was born in segregation-era Georgia. She experienced the injustice of Jim Crow firsthand. She worked alongside Dr. Martin Luther King during the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, and she participated in the Selma to Montgomery marches. When she came to Montgomery County, she continued to work for four decades. She was a guidance counselor at Poolesville High School and helped generations of students find a path forward. And she helped establish the Montgomery County NAACP and served as the first female chair of the Montgomery County Dr. Martin Luther King Commemorative Committee. And I just want to recognize both these people because they just passed. They're important leaders in the Black community, and we're all going to miss them. And I want to very quickly also remind people there was another act of anti-Semitic vandalism that targeted a Jewish synagogue in Albany earlier this week. It continues to be appalling. This kind of behavior is not acceptable. We want people to know that we will do everything we can do to find the people who perpetrate these kinds of acts of vandalism. And I want to reiterate that we don't tolerate this for anybody. Anti-Semitism is on the rise in the country, and its incidents increase the anxiety and pain felt by our Jewish community. But any act of hate, whether it's directed toward other faiths like the Muslim faith or Christians, or to communities like the LGBTQ community. All of those kind of acts make people feel unsafe. It creates a sense of fear and a sense of mistrust. And it's the kind of behavior that doesn't have any place in Montgomery County. We are going to continue to reiterate that our standards for people are not going to be ones that tolerate behavior, that whether it's anti-Semitic, anti-Muslim, anti-gay. This county is not going to be the kind of county that tolerates it, and we're going to continue to speak out against it. And I'll leave it at that for right now, because I do have to get on this other call. Will come back next week to talk more about the governor's State of the State address, which I attended yesterday, and because it was very interesting. So thank you all for being here today, and I will return next week, and hopefully not be tightly confined.
Thank you, Mr.
Thank you, Mark.
Conley.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.
Members of the media, if you'd like to remain for any additional questions, please do so. And if you have follow-up questions, you can also contact Scott Peterson. Dr. Peters, you have an update?
Thanks, Lorna. No update, just reminding folks that in times of crises and situations as we currently experience, please reach out to our mobile crisis number. I cannot overly repeat that number, 240-777-4000. It is a resource. Please use it. I'll turn it over to Sean O'Donnell for his public health update now.
Thank you, Dr. Bridgers. Happy to report that our long season of respiratory disease has improved quite a bit over the last few weeks, and there's still some going on out there. Please be mindful of your friends, relatives who are at risk for severe illness, but things are looking much better on that front. I also want to share appreciation for our staff members who responded very quickly to the school shooting. Testament to the training that they received from their leadership, testament to the professionalism that they exhibit. And we're so happy that they were able to be there. That's all I have.
Thank you, gentlemen. Members of the media, do you have any public health questions this morning? No more questions?
I don't know if it has to do with public health, but they wanted me to ask about the pothole blitz that's coming up here. Is there someone, Earl, or someone who could talk about what we can expect on our roadways in the coming weeks? I'm sure they're going to be torn up. And can you kind of just tell us a little bit about the efforts to fix the potholes?
Earl is not on the call, and I do not see anybody from transportation either.
Hey, Bob, I'll follow up with you with DOT.
Scott, thanks. Yeah, no big deal. They just wanted me to ask, but we got so into the Wooten stuff. Thank you, guys.
Okay, great. Thank you.
And as usual, county residents can call 311 to report potholes, as you well know. Okay, everyone, thank you for joining us this morning. Stay safe, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
A consistent message emerged. The need was growing